I've been a huge user of Stage Manager since it was released back in iPadOS 16, and I think it's safe to say that it has completely transformed the way that I use my iPad. So much so that I now actually use my iPad more than any other piece of tech in my house, including my Mac. So in this video, I wanted to share some tips and tricks to help you get the most out of Stage Manager and external monitor support on the iPad. Let's get into it. Before we begin, it's important to note that as of the date of recording, Stage Manager only works on iPad models running iPadOS 16 or later. And if you want full external monitor support, you will need an M series iPad as shown on screen. Now, activating Stage Manager is very simple. You just swipe down from the top right of your screen to open Control Center, and at the bottom, you should see a small window icon, which when you tap will activate Stage Manager. And immediately, you'll see that our full screen window has now become a floating window, which you can move around freely like so. At the top, you've got your dock so you can quickly access important apps. And on the left, you've got a sidebar that will contain 4 of your previously open stages. And essentially, the main sort of philosophy behind Stage Manager is that you have these so-called stages, and within each stage, you can fit up to 4 movable and resizable windows at once. So you'll see here, if I try adding in a 5th window, the OS will automatically kick out the least recently used / oldest window in that stage. And notice how I said windows and not apps, because if you take something like Safari, if I drag out one of the tab bars at the top, I can have multiple Safari windows in one stage. However, I can only have 4 of those windows at once, even though it's just one app. To be honest, it is a bit of an annoying limitation, but hey, what can you do? The way you move between spaces is by swiping from left to right at the bottom of your screen, just like how you would do with standard iPad multitasking. Alternatively, you can drag across the screen with 4 fingers, or swipe across with 3 fingers if you have a trackpad. Or if you're a keyboard pro, you can press on the globe and left or right arrow keys to quickly switch between stages. Also, if any of you are interested in this wallpaper, I'll leave it linked in the description below. Now, there are a number of different ways that you can add a new window into a stage. The one that I prefer the most is just dragging the app icon from my dock or from the app library directly into your stage, just like how you would do normally with the standard split screen multitasking. Or if you're using a Magic Keyboard, you can hit the Command plus Space keys to activate Spotlight Search and drag in the app from there. Now, admittedly, if you're coming over from a system like macOS, this might feel quite strange, because typically on the Mac, the way you'd open a new window is just by tapping on the app icon. However, if you tap on an app icon on the iPad, it will just open the window inside of a new stage. Now, there is a workaround for this, where if you hold onto the Shift key whilst pressing on the app, it will open that window inside of the current stage, so it behaves more like macOS. There are also other ways of adding in windows, where you can tap on the 3 dots at the top and add a new window, and then select which window that you want to add in. But I generally find those methods to be less efficient, and so I personally wouldn't recommend that you use them. Now, one of the main advantages of using Stage Manager is the ability to move and resize windows. So moving windows is pretty easy. You just hold onto the top of your window, either with your finger or with a trackpad, and simply move it to wherever you like. You'll notice there is a slight limitation though, which is that if you move your window very close to the edge or center, the OS will automatically snap it to the side or middle of the screen. And if you've got multiple windows in your stage, you can get into issues where you can't fully stack windows directly on top of each other, which sort of makes sense because as of right now, iPadOS doesn't really have a proper system for letting you select any window in a stage, like Mission Control on the Mac or Alt Tab on Windows. So you can imagine a scenario where you might accidentally stack all of your windows on top of each other, and you'd end up losing the window at the bottom. Thankfully though, there is a keyboard shortcut you can use to cycle between windows in a stage, and that's by pressing on the globe and tilde keys at the same time. And because you can only have a maximum of 4 windows per stage, realistically it shouldn't take too long for you to cycle through them all. Now, if you want to resize a window, you'll see that every window has this weird sort of hook at the bottom. Depending on where your window is on the screen, it will either be on the bottom left or the bottom right. But if you hold onto it with your finger, you'll be able to drag your finger across the screen to resize the window. Again, if you're coming from a system like macOS or Windows, where you can resize windows to the exact pixel, this might seem quite counterintuitive and strange, because here we have predefined sizes, where the window is almost resizing in this jagged manner compared to macOS, which is a lot smoother. But the advantage of this approach is that you can now resize iPad apps to their iPhone versions. So, if you wanted to have a small window for playing music in the corner of your screen without taking up the entire display, you can easily get the iPhone version of the music app on your iPad, which isn't really something that you can do on the Mac because Mac apps usually aren't as responsive. One thing to note though is that not all apps and windows will resize in the same way. So, quite famously, if you take something like Instagram or American Express, you can only get the iPhone versions of those apps on the iPad. Yes, you can technically make them slightly bigger and smaller, but the overall aspect ratios of the apps will remain the same. Now, there are a few shortcuts that you can use to quickly resize windows. The main one is by pressing the globe and F keys, which will automatically full screen a window for you. Or if you don't have access to a keyboard, you can simply tap on the three dots at the top and press full screen, which saves you having to drag it manually yourself. One thing to note here though is that full screening a window will throw it into a new stage. So if you want to bring your previous windows back, your best option is to drag them in from the sidebar on the left. If you want to minimize a window, you can just hit Command and M on your keyboard or tap the three dots and select minimize, which will place the window inside of your app switcher. Or if you want to fully kill a window, you can press Command and W or tap on the three dots at the top and select close. Or you can drag up from the bottom and swipe up on the window. Also, some of you may be wondering what case I'm using on my iPad. This is the Mag EZ Folio 2 case from Pitaka, who were kind enough to send this out to me. Pitaka make a number of premium accessories for various tech devices, like this Mag EZ Fold case that gives you a number of different viewing angles, whilst also offering protection for the sides of your iPad and your Apple Pencil. And the design of the folding mechanism almost gives it an origami-like aesthetic, which I'm a huge fan of. But my favorite accessory is actually the Mag EZ Folio stand that sits on my desk and floats my iPad whenever I'm using it as a second display on my desk. It kind of feels like having a mini iMac, especially with that floating design, but without the massive chin. And with the stand being made from an aramid fiber material, it can wirelessly charge accessories like my iPhone and AirPods. I'll leave a link to Pitaka's website and all of the products that I've mentioned in the description below. Make sure to check them out. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the Windows on Stage Manager can feel quite cramped, especially on that smaller 11-inch iPad model. So one fix to that is if you go into Control Center again and press onto that Stage Manager icon, you'll see two options to hide the dock and the sidebar. And so by default, they'll now be hidden unless you actively swipe to reveal them whenever you need them. Personally, I find having the dock visible to be quite useful, so I usually keep that bit on, but I don't find myself using the sidebar that much, so I like to keep that turned off. However, we can take this one step further because if we go into the Settings app and into Display and Brightness, at the bottom, you should see an option to adjust the display zoom. And if you select more space, essentially what this feature does is it will scale down the size of all the elements on your screen, allowing you to fit more content onto your iPad. At first, the difference might seem quite jarring, but your eyes will adjust to it eventually. And if you're somebody who uses your iPad with your Magic Keyboard a lot as a computer, I'd highly recommend turning this setting on because you're going to be able to view a lot more content overall. Now, if after following all of these steps, you're still not satisfied with the amount of screen real estate you have on your iPad, there is a third option, which is to connect your iPad to an external monitor. So all you do is if you have a monitor that connects via USB-C, you just stick your USB-C cable into the iPad and it should turn on automatically, provided the iPad is connected to a keyboard and mouse. If you're using an HDMI monitor, you are going to need some kind of HDMI to USB-C adapter. The only thing I'd recommend is that you'll want to opt for a cable that supports data transfer speeds of at least 10 gigabytes per second, because I find that anything less than that and some monitors might not power up and work. So if you're currently trying to connect your iPad to a monitor and it's not powering on, it might be because of the cable that you're using. But once you've got your display working, you can begin multitasking just like how you did on the iPad. The same 4 window limit per stage annoyingly still applies on the external monitor, but combined with the iPad, it means you can now have up to 8 windows in total across both of your screens. You can drag windows across the screen, full size them, and even move them between displays. And in the Settings app, if you go into Display and Brightness, you can adjust things like the scaling on your display. So if you've got a smaller monitor, you can squeeze in more information. And there's also an option to change the arrangement of the iPad, though I'm not entirely sure who's going to be using that top option. An occasional issue you might encounter is that you've connected your iPad to your display, but you're still getting those infamous black bars popping up on the sides. If this happens, it's worth going into Settings, into Multitasking and Gestures, and under the external monitor view, just making sure that Stage Manager is turned on and that it hasn't defaulted to mirroring. But yeah, once it's working, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this looks just like a Mac, especially apps like Safari and Notes. They look almost identical to their Mac counterparts. And I think that apps like the music and mail apps actually have better UIs than their Mac versions. When using your iPad with an external monitor, I'd also recommend using some kind of external mouse if you can. Yes, if you're using a Magic Keyboard, you can use that as your cursor, but I find that the trackpads on the Magic Keyboard tend to be quite small. And again, this is where the stand from Pitaka comes in handy, because I can just connect a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse to my iPad and mount the iPad onto the side and sort of use it as a second display without it interrupting my setup. Now, one thing to note here is that the full external monitor support only works on the following M series iPads as of the data recording. So if you own a 2018 or 2020 iPad Pro, if you connect those to a monitor, it will just mirror your screen like before. And for the models that do support it, you will need to have the screen of the iPad open at all times. So there's no clamshell mode like you get with the MacBooks, which sort of makes sense because a lot of app functions on iPadOS are still optimized for touch and not cursors. So you sort of do need the touchscreen as a failsafe. Also, if you're using an M4 iPad Pro or an M2 iPad Air and you're using a monitor that charges your iPad whilst connected, it is worth going into settings and under battery, selecting the 80% charging limit. And all this does is it just stops your iPad from charging past 80%, which will help to protect your battery health over the long run. Now, getting onto my experience using Stage Manager, on the whole, it's been pretty good. It's not been perfect, but it's been good on the whole. Because I use an 11-inch iPad Pro, I initially didn't make that much use of Stage Manager, other than to watch YouTube videos in the background. Very occasionally, if I was in a seminar at university, there would be times where I'd have GoodNotes taking up 2/3 of the screen and a few other apps like Desmos and Notion that I would keep in the background just to refer to, because I found it was quicker to just tap on a window at the back than to open each app in full screen and then having to swipe between the apps and getting lost between them. But admittedly, during day to day usage, I don't actually find myself using Stage Manager on the 11-inch iPad Pro that much. When I was testing out the 13-inch iPad Pro, I definitely did find myself using Stage Manager quite a lot, and it really did make the iPad feel like more of an actual computer. But on the 11-inch, I much prefer using the standard split screen, mainly because most of the time I'm just referring to one or two apps at a time. And with Stage Manager, you don't really get much information shown inside of the windows unless you split them in half. And split screen already does that for you without you having to manually resize and drag the windows. However, where I've really found Stage Manager to be transformational for my workflow is when it comes to unlocking that external monitor support because of the additional screen real estate that you get. It's allowed me to treat my iPad as more of a computer. When it comes to scripting these YouTube videos, using apps like Notion, Mail, Safari, and sort of general office work, I've pretty much delegated all of those tasks to my iPad. And it's only for the more techie stuff like Excel or video editing where I now use my Mac. And you might ask why I don't just use my Mac for everything. And it really just boils down to focus. For all of its wonders, Stage Manager on the iPad doesn't quite fix the issue of multitasking for me just yet. You can only fit in 4 windows per stage. There's no mission control alternative that lets you easily switch between windows. And I generally find that the fancy animations of iPadOS make it less efficient for multitasking compared to the Mac. But ironically, for some tasks, I actually prefer that because there have been many times where I'll be sat at my desk working on my Mac and I just spend half of my time switching between spaces and apps and not actually getting any meaningful work done. Whereas because managing multiple apps and windows on iPadOS doesn't feel as smooth and seamless, I often find myself just focusing on one or two windows at a time. And so for tasks like note taking or writing, which usually require a lot of deep work and focus, the iPad is generally my more preferred tool. And of course, there is the whole novelty argument where working on the iPad just feels a bit more fun and enjoyable than working on the Mac. And so if you enjoy working on your iPad with an external display, then theoretically you're more likely to get work done on that device. Assuming, of course, that the OS doesn't hinder your ability to get work done, which, to be honest, a lot of the time it does do. And on that note, there are still a number of issues that I have with Stage Manager. For example, even in 2024, I still get a lot of issues with certain apps crashing. Or if I open an app like GoodNotes on the iPad, it will decide to take up the entire display. And sometimes apps like Netflix won't even full screen themselves. So if you want to watch full screen movies on your monitor, you'll just have to hope that the app somehow recognizes the monitor as a television. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of changes that Stage Manager needs, which makes sense because I feel like Apple are sort of trying to reinvent the whole computing and multitasking experience with Stage Manager here. And so inevitably it's not going to be perfect for many years. You know, it took decades for macOS to get to where it is today. And so you can imagine that it will take quite a long time for iPadOS to reach the same level of maturity. Now, if you're interested in Stage Manager, you're probably also wondering if the iPad can be an effective computer replacement or not. And so I've created a video answering just that, which you can click somewhere at the top above. Consider leaving a like if this video was helpful and subscribe for the next one.